first topic. Yesterday, Nvidia officially released DLSS 3.5. So far, it's only supported in Cyberpunk 2077 and creative tool Chaos Vantage. But DLSS 3.5 is kind of cool. It adds ray reconstruction, which uses a supercomputer-trained AI network. So
buzzwords.
An AI network.
Yeah.
Then. Cool. To generate higher quality pixels in between sampled rays by recognizing lighting patterns from training data and recreating them during play. Nvidia claims an 8% frame rate boost in Cyberpunk 2077 over DLSS 3 and also claims that it is less demanding on the GPU, though that has not been quantified. This is wild, though. In response to a question about whether NVIDIA plans to prioritize native resolution performance in GPUs, Brian Catanzaro, NVIDIA's VP of Applied Deep Learning Research, stated that relying on brute power to improve graphical fidelity is a suboptimal solution when Moore's law no longer seems to hold. Instead, the future of gaming graphics will be a greater reliance on AI-assisted rendering and upscaling. According to Catanzaro, smarter technologies like DLSS need to be implemented to improve graphics fidelity and circumvent the otherwise low gen-on-gen performance improvements seen in today's graphics hardware. This is a quote, I think. Yeah, DLSS AI will eventually be able to replace traditional rendering entirely. Now, I think there's a ton for us to unpack here because, first of all, looking at it from a right now today perspective, I think it's fair to say that most gamers would strongly prefer to just render at native resolution and have an identical experience every time the game is rendered accurately, no matter what hardware they're on, right? And it just all comes down to, well, how well optimized is your hardware? But I would actually, okay, there's a few things that I want to kind of bring up as sort of a devil's advocate sort of argument. But yeah. I mean, do you think that's fair to say? Most gamers would rather just game at native res.
Not necessarily. I think I would be a little bit sketched out if I was a competitive player, trying to put something that's going to potentially, it seems pretty good most of the time, but maybe it doesn't show me the thing that I need to see perfectly the one time I need to see it.
Right, because you might actually be aiming at a pixel.
Yeah. So I don't know. But if I'm playing single player games, I don't know how much I care. As long as it looks really good, it's probably fine. You know?
So here's I think we can see from the
not just aiming at a pixel either. And maybe this kind of ruins the competitive game argument. But also like pixel perfect jumps, pixel perfect timings in various. You could be competitive in a single player game that you're trying
speed
to
runs
do
or
speed
something
runs
like that.
Or something. Yeah.
All right. Now here's before you guys get too far ahead. Do we have a problem?
Trying to figure that out. Seems like maybe just flipping back. Not sure.
Okay, cool. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, it at least seems like the chat is mostly on the same page as my sort of perception of the situation. They would rather not rely on these AI upscaling or machine learning solutions. But can I just make a small point? In game development, how often is it that we are seeing hacky solutions that are implemented in order for us to achieve playable frame rates? You know, whether it's, I remember doing this, going down this rabbit hole into how reflections in the scope of a rifle are done in traditional gaming versus path traced or ray traced gaming, where the kind of hacky solution where they basically create, I forget exactly what it was, but the way that they could do that with a minimal performance impact and still have it seem relatively accurate just absolutely blew my mind. what is the difference there? That's kind of my question to you. What's the difference if it's implemented at a driver level by an Nvidia or an AMD versus if it's implemented game by game in order to optimize the game? Your thoughts? Yeah, it reflects a pre-rendered image is at least one of the techniques for that.
I don't know. Something that concerns me about a lot of this kind of stuff too is like what we saw with Starfield. I know I'm like giving kind of a politician answer, so I'm not answering the question that you asked.
I'm still going to ask you to answer the question I asked. But sure, go ahead.
But like we saw that come out without DLSS, right? And sure, the community was able to respond that time. And there was a paid solution, then there was free solutions, and then now Bethesda said that they're going to bring native DLSS to Starfield, and that's cool and whatever, sounds good. But if the quote that I heard that kind of spooked me a little bit of DLSS/AI will eventually be able to replace traditional rendering entirely, like that sounds like we're going to run into a lot of issues. I feel like that would bring problems in relation to like abandonware, dead games that you can't play anymore because there's like some weird thing going on with how it was expected to work at one point in time, but now our current rendering paths are different. I also think that there's a lot of potential for really not cool combat between the various companies that have their various proprietary solutions that are trying to sponsor a game, and then they try to, line pockets to get them to not actually include certain solutions. So it's basically unplayable on whatever graphics card. And then like the performance difference between brands ends up being really dramatic depending on the company and the partnership that they had with the GPU company, stuff like that. I
mean, whether the anti-competitive stuff happens or not, it's not like we haven't seen similar things in the past. And I don't necessarily know if it's going to be any different than, your TressFX and your Hairworks and your PhysX and all the different things that we've seen over the years. And can I again play devil's advocate again here and say, okay, but what if the AI assisted version is just legitimately better? Seeing what they can do with the amount of die area on a modern GPU that is dedicated to this machine learning processing, going through these trained models, if that advances at a faster rate than just raw GPU grunt, I mean, could we see a game developer be able to design like this? You remember this, right? NVIDIA Canvas.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, this wasn't being done in real time at, 60 to, 500 frames per second when they first showed it off. But I think it's pretty clear that in the machine learning space, we're seeing a development or an advancement curve that is much faster than traditional GPU raster rendering. So with that in mind, is this a better way?
I think it kind of already is, because even with 3.0.
Because we're already in a situation where we are. It's clear that 4K is kind of the final frontier for you to have any hope of high refresh rate gaming. I don't foresee, and you know what? I'm probably going to end up eating these words at some point, but I don't foresee a reason, I don't foresee any need for us to drive games at significantly higher resolutions than that natively, because you have so much data to process at 4K that you could upscale it, not infinitely, but wow, a lot.
Yeah. And just the general improvements that you get from it are something that we've recommended people use for quite a while now. So like, I don't know.
So I see 4K
if it's
as
that much better now.
Basically the end of that, which is almost kind of an argument against my point, in that if we're not trying to push resolution higher, well, then the obvious answer is to push visual fidelity higher. But then looking at, Yeah, Starfield. What's that technique called where they actually scanned real objects in order to get the texture quality super high?
Sorry, say again?
They scanned real world objects in order...
I feel like Dan is going to know photo something.
Photogrammetry.
Photogrammetry,
Yeah. So if you could just create all of your in-game assets with photogrammetry and then just run basically almost like a mocap sort of equivalent, or like a proxy footage equivalent, where you're actually rendering with markers essentially, and then your GPU is just interpreting. It's almost like compressing the entire asset library of the game in a sense. Like, you kind of get what I mean, right?
Yeah, but
because we're coming back to this.
That seems even more concerning for multiplayer games. And like,
Sure,
there's been this. Like, what about destructible environments in multiplayer games using that setup?
As long as you, well, actually, hold on. That could be a way to make destructible environments manageable from a performance standpoint. Because if you've got this material and you've assigned characteristics to it, then all you need to do...
So the geometry isn't done that way.
Yeah, so you can, all you
textures.
Have now you can spend all that compute on geometry, and then the textures, or like the unique scarring of the surface or whatever. Yeah, that might differ from one player to the next, but it'll be probably reasonably close until, you know, someone discovers that if you wear an all blacked out, you know, suit or something like that, and you happen to stick close to like where explosions where you can hide or something, you know, but what's the difference, Luke? People are already exploiting everything anyway.
Yeah.
So it's just a new thing to do, right? Like, you know, don't pretend, you know, your hands are totally clean. I see you and Joe playing Tarkov with your second monitor with your Discord, seeing each other's viewpoint. Like, that's not technically the way it's meant to be played, but realistically, everybody else who's squatted up is doing it anyway. So, okay, fine. Then at a certain point, it's not like unfair. It's get good. Yeah. If you don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah, I just see like,
dress in black.
Sometimes you'll see engine demos, and those engine demos will like look really sick. The fidelity will be super high.
Yeah.
But then you start kind of diving more into it. And you start figuring out like, okay, creative modding from the community in this engine is like not going to be a thing for XYZ reason. None of these environments are destructible. If you look at these environments in different angles, it starts to break down in pretty bad ways, like different things like that.
Sure.
And I think my concern if we go away from like just the statement of replacing traditional rendering keeps getting me concerned about like the technology that we've already built for traditional rendering. Abandoning that and going forward, I feel like is going to have pitfalls that we don't necessarily understand, that I don't understand. In regards to the games that we can necessarily make. Maybe I'm just completely wrong about this. That sounds good to me. Hopefully that's right. But
I mean, I think once we resolve a lot of the copyright and intellectual property ownership issues around AI generated assets, if anything, I mean, maybe I'm just coming at this from a layperson's perspective, right? Like, I don't do game development, but honestly, it seems to me a lot easier.
Yeah, probably.
Like
easier, yeah, but is it as good of a space to be creative in? That's the thing that I'm concerned about.
I guess it depends what kind of creativity you want. Like, you know, I think we've talked before about like if I was to, you know, invest in making a game, you know, what kind of game would it be? And honestly, if I was to spec out my dream game that I would make, it would be episodic, even though I know the business model is totally broken and doesn't work. It would be heavily story focused. Like, I could see, okay, there were these like kind of trashy like fantasy novels that I read when I was like a teenager, by this author Terry Brooks, and it's all about this like fantasy world Shannara, and I could I could honestly, it's all just like adventuring all over this land. And I could see a game like that where you, instead of hiring game writers necessarily, you hire writers, like, and just create this world that gradually opens up and with every episode creates more and more environments for you to go and visit. And essentially an MMO, but not...
You really got to play Baldur's Gate.
Massively multiplayer. Oh, I know. 100%.
You're really nicely defining Baldur's Gate 3.
Well, that's great. One difference, though, is that I wouldn't intend anything to be high fidelity. So from my point,
looks really good. Yeah.
From my point of view, I had almost zero interest. Like I was thinking like RPG Maker level of graphical fidelity. Like it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
But if I could just, draw a stick figure and then say, okay, that now it just
Make
looks
that
good.
Something cool. So you're talking about basically lowering barrier of entry.
Yes.
Don't have to be as much of a coder. Don't have to be as much of a designer.
Or reallocating resources, because I think that's something that we've mostly agreed upon for a long time, that a lot of the time the things that games get wrong is they'll have these really cool technical details, or they'll be absolutely, beautiful.
But it's not actually fun.
But it's not fun. It's not engaging.
The AAA curse.
Or like the story sucks, and you just, your sidekick dies, and you're like, so? You were just a three-dimensional
or
array
even worse
of
than
pixels.
that. You're like, oh, thank goodness. Now they're not going to bug me anymore.
Yeah, so thank gravy. I don't have to do another
Shut up, Sarah.
escort quest.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, I don't know. We've got people in chat saying, I want graphical fidelity, or I'm not interested.
Yeah, but you can get that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing.
No part of what he's saying is that you wouldn't get that. What he's saying is that when he's making it, he doesn't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
He can draw stick figures, he can do whatever, and then it's going to turn that into something more.
But again, there's all this intellectual property stuff to figure out.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I don't know when or how or if that's going to be resolved.
I suspect it will be, but yeah, when, how, or if is pretty questionable. It's an interesting thing because it's cool that more things are more accessible with it, but then it's also not cool taking people's jobs away, and also it's real good at getting something that's going to be acceptable to a decent amount of people, but it's not real good at making masterpieces.
No, that's fair. That's totally fair.
And like there's this old story of, where was it? Austria? Is that where Beethoven's from? Austria?
Can't remember.
Wherever he's from, there's, if I remember correctly, this could just be not even a true story. So
great.
Watch it.
Here comes fake story time.
Totally might be.
I'm really glad that we have a show for this. I heard this
forever ago. It might have even been a different
composer.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so you don't know who, you don't know where,
I don't know if
you don't know exactly when, you have no idea if it's true. Why don't we just say Luke's about to make up a story?
Yeah.
Okay, tell us a story.
But it was basically every school in that country had a grand piano.
Yeah.
Because they're like, you never know when the next version
in Luke's fictional country. Okay, yes, carry on.
Every school had a grand piano because they wanted the opportunity for if another person like this came around, that they would be able to realize it.
Okay, cool. That's a really neat idea.
Yeah.
If from your made up story about your made up people in your made up place.